In this episode of Biblical Unlocks, we will go through a chapter of the Bible and make it make sense in your life today. Studies routinely show that reading your Bible regularly significantly lowers symptoms of depression, anxiety, and anger, whilst also increasing forgiveness, compassion, and a sense of purpose. So if you enjoy episodes like this, please consider following and rating the show. It's free, helps me out a lot, and you can always change your mind later. Enjoy the show. Hello and welcome to another episode of Biblical Unlocks. Today we're going to go through Exodus 1. So this is a new chapter of the Bible, a new book of the Bible, and obviously a new chapter, because we go through one chapter every single day, and this is a great chapter in the redemptive history of Israel, because the children of Israel have been planted in Egypt, and now they're going to be oppressed, and God's people are going to be prepared for deliverance. This is one of the most famous stories in the Bible. It contrasts human fear with brutal oppression and how God delivers his people. And it actually set the basis for how, especially with God's people and Christians and Jews and stuff like that, how they thrive under persecution and how their courageous faithfulness actually plants the seeds for future redemption. So all of this is going to become very important in the chapter. So let's read the chapter in full, and then we're going to go through some deep biblical unlocks. Exodus 1. These are the names of the sons of Israel who came to Egypt with Jacob, each with his household: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah; Issachar, Zebulun, and Benjamin; Dan and Naphtali; Gad and Asher. The total number of people born to Jacob was 70. Joseph was already in Egypt. Then Joseph died, and all his brothers and that whole generation. But the Israelites were fruitful and prolific. They multiplied and grew exceedingly strong, so that the land was filled with them. Now, a new king arose over Egypt, who did not know Joseph. He said to his people, "Look, the Israelite people are more numerous and powerful than we. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, or they will increase, and in the event of war join our enemies and fight against us, and escape from the land." Therefore they set taskmasters over them to oppress them with forced labor. They built supply cities, Pithom and Ramses, for Pharaoh. But the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied and spread, so that the Egyptians came to dread the Israelites. The Egyptians subjected the Israelites to hard servitude, and made their lives bitter with hard servitude in mortar and bricks, and in every kind of field labor. They were ruthless in all the tasks that they imposed on them. The king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, one of whom was named Shiphrah and the other Puah, "When you act as midwives to the Hebrew women and see them on the birth stool, if it is a son, kill him, but if it is a daughter, she shall live." But the midwives feared God. They did not do as the king of Egypt commanded them, but they let the boys live. So the king of Egypt summoned the midwives and said to them, "Why have you done this and allowed the boys to live?" The midwives said to Pharaoh, "Because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women, for they are vigorous and give birth before the midwife comes to them." So God dealt with the midwives, and the people multiplied and became very strong. And because the midwives feared God, he gave them families. Then Pharaoh commanded all of his people, "Every son that is born to the Hebrews you shall throw into the Nile, but you shall let every daughter live." Alright, time for some deep biblical unlocks. Verses 1 to 7, we see Israel's growth in Egypt. So Israel arrives as 70 and becomes a multitude. They are fruitful, they increase greatly and fill the land. Sounds pretty familiar to what we saw, or what we were meant to see in Genesis chapter 1, right? So what we were meant to see is that that Adam and Eve were meant to be fruitful and multiply and grow in the land, which is exactly what the intention of of God was in the land, especially. We have some cross-references of this that we saw in previous chapters of Genesis. Essentially what's happening is God's blessing continues to be in effect despite the exile and displacement of the people. So we have numerical growth, and this is obviously a sign of the continuity of God's blessing and seeds of the future nation. The way we know that there were 70 people was because we saw in Genesis 46, chapter 27. Genesis chapter 46, verse 27. The children of Joseph who were born to him in Egypt were 2. All the persons of the household of Jacob who came into Egypt were 70. So that's there. And in the last days of Jacob, when we saw those, we saw a little bit of a prophetic vision, right? We saw a prophetic vision of Jacob, and Jacob essentially said that the Israel settled in the land of Egypt, in the land of Goshen. They gained possessions in it, and they were fruitful and multiplied exceedingly. This is Genesis 47:27. And then we also see another cross-reference in Psalm 105, chapter 23, verse 23 to 27. Israel came to the land. Jacob lived as an alien in the land of Ham, and the Lord made his people very fruitful and made them stronger than their foes, whose hearts he then turned to hate his people, to deal craftily with his servants. And then we're going to see Moses and Aaron later on. He sent his servant Moses and Aaron, whom he had chosen. They performed his signs among them and miracles in the land of Ham. So this is what is coming up. Okay, verses 8 to 10. Then we see a new Pharaoh. A new Pharaoh arrives who does not know Joseph. A new king, unfamiliar with Joseph's service, fears Israel's strengths, and he imagines that they might join Israel's enemies in a war. So here, what we're seeing, and this has been seen all throughout history, that when we have political amnesia, that is, we forget the past, and this is actually an interesting topic. I was discussing this with someone else. Throughout history, right? You often hear or learn from your parents and your grandparents. But beyond your parents and your grandparents, who do you really have to learn from? Well, you can't. So that's why oftentimes you will tend to repeat the mistakes of your grandparents' parents because you don't learn from them specifically. And that's how you tend to repeat history, which is why people will often support wicked ideologies and ideologies which have been tried and tested to have not worked in the past, but because they sound better than whatever's going on right now, they tend to be repeated. Those who know history, those who do not know history are bound to repeat it, and those who do know history are bound to watch others repeat it. So that's what we end up seeing here as well in the biblical narrative. Joseph was unfamiliar. The new king of Egypt was unfamiliar with Joseph's service, and hence, because he forgot, he realized why there's so many Israelites here, and this insecurity can actually produce, obviously, scapegoating and preemptive oppression, right? Because rulers often act from fear, and fear is an ultimate driving force for these sorts of things, which is important to remember, right? It's important to remember because if we aren't aware of this, then we're bound to repeat history ourselves. This exact same story is important because it is actually mentioned again in Acts chapter 7, verses 18 to 19. Until another king who had not known Joseph ruled over Egypt, he dealt craftily with our people and forced our ancestors to abandon their infants so that they would die. And then also in Deuteronomy chapter 28, verses 49, the Lord will bring a nation from far away, from the end of the earth, to swoop down on you like an eagle, a nation whose language you do not understand. So the idea here is that, with Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 49, the idea is basically it's a warning against a fear-driven exile. That is to say, when you act out of fear, the consequences, you're going to have to face up to that. We saw that in Galatians chapter 6, verse 7. Do not be deceived. God is not mocked. For whatever you sow, you will reap, right? You reap what you sow. And that's an important biblical theme as well. And something here as well, Pharaoh enslaves his people, right? He enslaves the people, forces them into like brick making, hard labor, and increases their burdens. So again, you're creating an oppressive system which devalues human life again. But remember that God's blessing can persist even under immense persecution, suffering, and coercion. We saw this again in Romans chapter 8, verse 28. For God works all things for good, for his greater glory, and I'm paraphrasing, but for his greater glory, for those who love him and who are called according to his purposes. And we also see something here as well in Judges chapter 5, verse 8. It's important cross-reference. Judges chapter 5, verse 8. We read that when new gods were chosen, when war was in the gates, was shield or spear to be seen among 40,000 in Israel? So this is just the cry of the oppressed when they choose new gods, when war is in the gates. Was shield or spear to be seen? When you see oppression, it's not necessarily God forgetting you, it's God building you. And that's something we need to remember. Okay, final verses 15 to 22, midwives' courage, and we see Pharaoh has a very interesting decree. Pharaoh commands Hebrew midwives to kill newborn boys, right? And because the midwives, they fear God, that's what it's written in this passage. They disobey, and God blesses them with families. So Pharaoh escalates his policy. He orders all people to cast little boys into the Nile. So what does this mean? We have a policy where Pharaoh commands Hebrew midwives to kill newborn boys, and ordinary acts of faithfulness by the midwives subvert the evil policies enacted by Pharaoh. So civil disobedience in this case, on a civil level, is actually rooted in fearing God, can save lives. And God honors those who choose a life over compliance with policy. This is really important because we can see this in our everyday lives. There are policies out there which seek to destroy life. And yet, some people even listen to Christians who say that it is necessary to kill newborn babies because for whatever social arrangements that are presented, whatever arguments that are presented. But here we see a clear representation of what God thinks of killing newborn babies. Hebrews chapter 11 verse 23, we read, "By faith Moses was hidden by his parents for 3 months after his birth because they saw that the child was beautiful and they were not afraid of the king's edict." Notice, God has the ability to change the mind of rulers, of kings. We saw this in Proverbs, and we also see this here. You should not be afraid of earthly powers because they are not the ultimate power. In Psalm chapter 94 verse 16, "Who rises up for me against the wicked? Who stands up for me against evildoers?" So God, these are questions which should convict you. Say, who is going to rise up against the wicked? Who's going to stand up for me against evildoers? Obviously, the answer to both of these questions is God Almighty. So do we trust God or we trust ourselves? And then finally, I just want to point out, because again, we're going to see some biblical cross-references to the gospel, to Jesus Christ. When Jesus Christ was born, right, we had what is called the massacre of the infants. Herod saw. So in Matthew chapter 2 verse 16 to 18 we read, "When Herod saw that he had been tricked by the Magi, he was infuriated, and he sent and killed all the children in and around Bethlehem who were 2 years old or under, according to the time that he had learned from the Magi. Then what had been spoken through the prophet Jeremiah was fulfilled. A voice was heard in Ramah, wailing and loud lamentation, Rachel weeping for her children. She refused to be consoled because they are no more." Again, Herod's massacre of the infants echoes Pharaoh's massacre of the infants, of the newborn boys. But what are the key takeaways from this chapter that we can apply in our everyday life? Well, number one, we need to anchor our identity in God and not where we are or what our place is. So, for example, you can find your security in your status, your job, your relationships. But that's not who God says you are. You have worth, meaning, and identity simply by being a child of God and for no other reason. And the reason why I'm saying this is because you could, as an Israelite, start to anchor your identity in the fact that you are under a servitude, you're slave. You are a slave to the Egyptian authorities, and hence that is now your identity, and you're taking away from the fact that God is the one who determines your ultimate authority and your identity. Next, it's important to recognize when policies are driven by fear, and you need to respond with discernment. We see how fear, an irrational fear in this case, caused Pharaoh to implement a policy to kill all newborn babies. Why? Well, not all newborn Israelite boys. Why? What was the reason for this? Because he feared that the Israelites might befriend enemies which attack the Egyptian cause. So notice, all of this is possibilities. All of these are fear-driven policies that stem from an irrational idealization of what might happen. The other thing that we need to do is stand for the vulnerable. That's what God calls us to do. Stand for the vulnerable. Who are the contemporary Hebrew babies that are in need of protection in our context, in our contemporary context? Are they exploited workers? Are they, let's be real, unborn human babies that are being aborted? Are they refugees? Are they those who are being trafficked? It's important to advocate for and defend and volunteer to help protect the dignity and life of the most vulnerable. Because that's exactly what these midwives did. They protected the Hebrew newborn baby boys, and God blessed them abundantly. So that's it for this episode of Biblical Unlocks. This show is designed to help you keep up your habit of reading the Bible, understanding the Bible, and applying it in your daily life. I upload daily, so if you don't want to miss tomorrow's episode, feel free to rate the show and follow. Otherwise, just have a blessed day. And always remember, if you're not in your word, you're in your feelings. Godspeed.